let's build a mealworm farm together. Quick update on the current status of things for the new building, along with some feedback I got from some folks that I want to go through just to get some more info out there about what I'm thinking, but also for these folks that have given me this feedback, taking time out of their day. Just want to let you know that I'm reviewing it. I'm thinking about it. It's churning up here. It's probably been 2 weeks since I posted the first one, or the last video, I mean, on this topic. Since then, I've met with 2 additional builders. One builder didn't really go through much detail. They were very unfamiliar with what was required from our county here as far as distance staying away from the road, distance staying away from a pond that's on the property, things like that. And so very general, high-level conversation, not very much detail, which is fine. It was a good perspective. But they did give me the contact info of the folks that I do need to reach out to from the county just to get some general info and get the guidelines or the restrictions that are in place that will help us figure out, help the builder and I figure out where the building's going to go, sizing, etc. I have not moved forward with the county yet. I'll probably do that this week just to reach out and say, hey, here's what the plans are. Myself and another individual are still working through the purchase of the property that the building's going to go on. And so until that makes headway and we get really close to finalizing that, maybe even get close to it being done or done, that's when I'll probably kick things into a higher gear from a building perspective and tasks there. So I really appreciate you folks leaving feedback, sending me emails, getting info. It is being utilized. I am thinking about it. So let's kind of dig into that. So I have a rather lengthy email. I picked out little pieces of this to chat through. One of the things that's interesting about this building is it's a 2-level building for a mealworm farm, which is, I guess, a bit distinct, much different than my current building. And so one of the things that was mentioned was that 9 feet high, which is what I'm going with, could be a bit short. Good lighting, good ventilation combined are probably going to take 2 or 3 feet at the top, and you have 7.5 feet of rack that you can easily make good use of. I'm going to disagree with that. I'm in 9 feet right now, and I have enough space at the top because I have to manually touch those trays, right? So a human needs to be able to reach them. I'm pretty tall, and we still have 2 or 3 trays worth of space above the tallest tray. And I prefer not to go higher than that, because once you start going higher, then moving those things around becomes much more complex, much more likely to tip, things like that. And so the current 9 feet that I'm in is working well. I've got lighting in there, ventilation is working fine. And so I think 9 feet is okay. The other thing is, you do mention this later about like restrictions and whatnot. One of the builders did say if we get above, like 9 feet was really going to be our max, because if we get above, I think he said 22 feet, we start getting into wind shear and like not real engineering, but much more expansive engineering and design and construction necessary. And so 2 9-feet levels, along with, a foot to 14 inches in the middle, depending on weight, for that middle floor, that's putting us kind of at the max where we need to be from a stay under height perspective. So for those reasons, I'm kind of sticking with that 9 feet. Next thing you mentioned, if it were a building for just growing instead of multi-purpose building, I would favor making it as narrow and long as possible, or as narrow and long as feasible. I don't disagree with that. I like the idea, because it's going to keep it consistent. The problem with making it super lengthy is HVAC. The longer you have to run, the bigger the loss, things like that. And it's more room to have to travel. And so what I'm thinking about from a design perspective, and this is mentioned elsewhere by another individual as well, is location of like doors and where the harvesting, where the sifting machines, where the pupa sifter is going to be, like where those things are going to be at. I feel like that needs to be centralized, so that if you're in the middle of the building and you need to go to the far end to collect those trays, to bring them in and process them, you're going to take less time because you don't have to travel physically as far. Realistically, all this stuff's probably going to be on pallets with a pallet jack, so it's not like we're expending a lot of human energy to move single stacks around independently. But just the time to have to move from wherever you're harvesting down to get those and come back, if we can minimize that, I think that's probably where I'm leaning towards from a building perspective. And again, I think somewhere further on down here, you do mention like what are the limitations that we're dealing with? Limited number of buildings per lot, any maximum length, breadth, height of buildings. This is the only building I can put on the property. So that's as far as I'm going to go into that. Maximum length, width, height. I mentioned the height one already. Maximum length and width is really going to depend on what I find out from the county. I'm shooting for 5,000 square feet as kind of the biggest footprint that it seems like is feasible over there. That might need to shrink based on, if I have to stay so many feet away from that pond and so many feet away from the center of the road, and I don't get any variance there or anything like that. But since this is the only building I can physically put on the property, I want to try to make that as big as possible. It's going to take me a long time to fill that much space, but I'd rather have it than need it later and not have it. So once I get those restrictions, once I get those guidelines from the county, I'll definitely share them here. And what I'll probably do at that point is get more of a drawn out perspective, or draw out that perspective of like, here's a pond, here's the gravel road, here's the driveway that we have, right? So that we can get a physical look at that, probably walk over there and get some video of it as well. Once we start putting some stakes in the ground to really see the physical impact and potential. One of the things you mentioned, putting a garage door at the end of the building by the gravel drive, clustering all the non-rack stuff at the same end along the 50-foot breadth of the building. I kind of touched on that a little bit. I think that like location of the doors and the, both the garage door for getting in and out with a pallet jack and a forklift, along with human door entrances, I think is really just going to depend on how that building lays out. I don't envision, I think from a code perspective, I have to have doors on each end. And I'll have a door by the garage door, human door by the garage door. I don't anticipate needing any windows. I think that's not necessary. What else do I have from a door perspective? I think, the negative potentially of putting that, and this again depends on layout of how that 50 by 100 is going to sit on the property. But if it's what I'll call along the road for right now, then that means that by putting the garage door, my thought is put that garage door in the middle, like that's where the central area is going to be, for, receiving stuff or shipping things out or processing. I think that's probably like putting it in the middle means I'm going to have a longer concrete pad out front over to where the semis come and go, that I would need to take that forklift to load and unload. That's additional cost from a concrete perspective, but I think that we're going to have more moving around that building than we are time driving out to load and unload trucks. Maybe multiple doors once all is said and done. Like, again, I think it's really going to depend on the physical layout, whether it is along the road, long end, or if it's the other way. Because if it's the other way, then the middle of the building is going to be real close to where the gravel drive ends right now for the semis to park and be able to get the forklift over. That might work out well, but from a physical perspective for the property, it visually isn't good like that. And all that's hard to describe for right now until I get some video of that for you guys. Let's see. Another comment you made about insulation and whatnot. Currently, the plan is to do spray foam insulation on the entire envelope of the building, and then within, in a 50 by 100, let's say, depending on what the span is and the weight loads and all the engineering, wherever the poles are required to be, let's say they're every 16 feet or every 20 feet. That's where the wall on the inside will be to divide the building into sections. And so those walls will each have bad insulation, probably the 2-inch rigid foam on one end or one side. Maybe not. That might be overkill at some point, but there'll be some insulation there so that that section, that 16 or 20 foot wide by 50 section, that part and the upper part will be connected together with one HVAC unit. And I'll fill that in with insects, and then we'll finish off another section, which means either moving that wall and expanding those sections or putting in another independent section with another independent HVAC. TBD on that as far as how that's going to play out as we expand things. But from an insulation perspective, that's what's happening, just to get you up to speed on the envelope and the individual sections. Because you do mention it might make sense to have geothermal cooling, and you put geotherming in air quotes for everybody watching. Geothermal cooling for that room, just an underground tunnel and a fan could supply you with 58 to 60 degree air throughout the warm season before introducing any cooling elements. 100% agree with you there. It's one of the things I wanted to try in the existing building. There's just too many things that could potentially happen, that it's like right now there's a lot of things that need to occur, like fixing the mealworm sifter and getting things squared away. New employee just came on within the last month, and so lots of training going on, things like that. But one of the things I'd like to try is some form of passive geothermal heating and cooling with just the tube underground, pulling that air in, and just seeing how that works. One of the things I'm really excited about long-term with this new building is that I'm going to keep the existing building I have, and that can turn into a playground without me risking the business, right? Like, I think adding geothermal to that, or adding that sort of passive heating and cooling scenario, I think that there's not a big potential the whole colony is going to get wiped out, right? But there's the potential it could slow down, or something could happen. And I don't want to risk the business from a revenue perspective. We operate in capitalism, so I have to make money in order to keep things going, right? And so by having two buildings, that breaks apart that risk, where I can tinker a little bit more risky things from a testing perspective and see what the impacts are. I like the idea of that because the other benefit to that is air exchange and getting fresh oxygen in, which again is beneficial for the insects. So, all right, let's keep going forward. Once you start using a good fraction of the building, you'll be using about 30,000 pounds of bran a month. It will no longer make sense to get the bran from a bag. If you can, you'll want a silo attached to the building so you can just pump it right in and then dispense it however you need to. At this point, you'll be going through it so fast that freezing or baking won't make any difference unless you're making your own. As long as you keep the humidity down, that will be enough. Couple thoughts. I am not convinced that we would be using it fast enough that freezing and baking wouldn't be necessary, or that freezing or baking or some sort of process to the substrate would need to be done, or would not need to be done. Because once we put it in those trays with the mealworms, those trays sit for a while, and if there's anything in there, pantry moth larvae, grain mites, yes, you can keep your humidity down, but you're hydrating those trays somehow. There's just too much of a chance. Weevils, right? Like, there's too much of a chance that something gets loose and starts replicating in there that you don't want. And so I don't think that there's a scenario where you can't bake, deep freeze, or process. And I say process because I'm not quite sure what I mentioned in a recent video, the idea of looking into an entoliter. I'm not sure I don't know what that's called yet, right? Like, you're processing it, you're putting it through this thing that's crushing all the eggs that might be in there or the insects that might be in there. I'm not sure what that's called, sanitizing it. But that might be the potential option. The other issue I have is that I can't find a wheat bran supplier that will deliver to fill a silo. And so, unfortunately, I'm stuck with thinking about the 50-pound bags. Ideally, what happens though is that with this volume, the 30,000 pounds a month, I personally have not tried to calculate that. It's going to be a lot. I'm going to need something. I just haven't gone through that motion yet, so I don't know if that lines up with what I'm using now versus what will happen in that building. But I'm going to need something other than moving 50-pound bags of Bran. And so we'll see how that goes. Like, it may be a scenario where, as I sit here and think, if the Entoliter works out, I order in pallets of those of the wheat bran, lift those up with the forklift to the second floor, and then we, dump those into the hopper. It goes through the Entoliter and down into a storage container or an area where we've got everything set up to then dispense it to trays, right? Like some very simple conveyor or elevator that takes the hopper after the Entoliter has done its thing. It's got all the bran in there, and you're using that grain elevator or whatever it is, simple 8-foot tall thing to then dispense it into trays as we're doing things. That feels much more feasible to me than a silo, which I'm not convinced it's going to get hot enough in the wintertime here in central Missouri. And so I'm just really worried about that. Plus, just what am I going to fill it with? I would need to find a relationship with somebody in the Midwest that can deliver wheat bran into a grain silo on a consistent manner and not be crazy high from a cost perspective. It seems much more feasible and less risky, right? Like, I feel like that's going to be a big challenge. Maybe it won't. If anybody knows any hookups for wheat bran in central Missouri or in the Midwest, that would be great to get me talking with somebody. But I think that, unfortunately, managing bags of it right now is probably where I'm at. And I think that's why I'm exploring the Entoliter, because having to pick those things up in and out of deep freezes is not going to be beneficial to anybody's back in the long run. Someone's going to get hurt. And so I want to avoid that. And from a timing perspective, there will be situations where all of a sudden we're going to need bran and we just don't have it if it has to go through a deep freeze, right? And so what I understand about the Entoliter is it's very fast or on demand. And so, I'm still researching volume. Like, if I pour a 50-pound bag in a hopper, how long does it take to work through that 50 pounds? I don't think it's very long. And it seems much more feasible for a 2-story facility to be able to process that stuff without having to use up a bunch of space to pour it, empty a bag into an elevator that then lifts it up, puts it through the Entoliter, or something like that. It seems much more plausible to do that with a 2-level building and an Entoliter. But I think the other thing you mentioned is, moving it around. I do have a chore time auger. Those are designed for like turkey houses and hog houses and stuff to move the feed through tubes with an flexible auger system. My intention, I've got one. I want to use it with the frass to move the frass out of the building and out of the sifter into bags. I just need to get that set up. Another thing that takes priority over testing passive geothermal, right? But I think that's one potential option would be to have a centralized area where it's stored, comes out of the Entoliter, the wheat bran, and it's kind of stored in that thing. And there are ways to chore time auger it to other locations efficiently. Or we just do that in a centralized area and we're just moving the pallets where they need to go, right? Ideally, by that time, we have a system figured out where we don't have to add more bran to these trays where they're at. We put enough bran or substrate into the tray, park them, let them roll for however long it takes for them to eat through all that, and then separate them out to where they can grow more optimally, get the frass out of there, add substrate, that sort of thing. That's kind of where I'm at with the 30,000 pounds of bran and the silo topic. I think, you mentioned keeping the humidity down would be enough. I think that keeping the humidity down, you can only do that for so long because you're introducing some sort of hydration, some sort of moisture source. It's too big of a risk to then all of a sudden have mites everywhere. Next one. Also, if it's not already planned, you'll want an exhaust fan at least 3 feet in diameter, close to wherever you sift your frass. I'm going to 100% disagree with you here as being not realistic here in central Missouri. Over the winter, it got down to -10 this year. This summer, I think we hit 105 a few times Fahrenheit. And so it's not feasible for me to have a giant fan blowing out into the world because whatever air volume is blowing out, I have to pull in from somewhere else. And I can't pull in 105-degree heat or -10-degree cold whenever we need to harvest. Even if, like currently, the harvesting is happening all in that one giant mealworm room in the current building, right? In this future building, we'll have a harvesting room or area. It's not feasible to, like I as a human don't want to turn on a giant fan and work in a 105-degree air exchange area, right? The other thing is I'm blowing that out. What human or person or animals are going to be having to deal with that once it goes out? And so that's not something I'm willing to do. We'll have dust collection. I've got a dust collector hooked up to the mealworm sifter now. One alteration I want to make to that, and I think it'll be really good from a collection perspective, and then we don't need to worry about it. It's working much better than the old system that I had, and so I think it's only going to get better. And then that drastically cuts down any issues. We don't have to do the air exchanges that would need to happen for this giant fan scenario. I've seen one in operation in a video, and so I completely understand what you're saying. At least I think I do, and I just don't think it's feasible. But I think that if I'm not understanding correctly, just let me know, because I'm always open to being adjusted and seeing if there's other options. So thank you, sir, for that detailed response and info that you gave me. Hopefully some of this helped. I have some more though, so we'll keep going. This is a long one, but it's a good one, I think. So now I've got some thoughts from somebody in one of the Discords that I'm in. First one was put the doors or the holes in the closest corner of the road. You don't need more road. Forklift can drive on gravel. Splits in the middle, splits the building in half, and the flow works better. I agree with that. Outside of the forklift can drive on gravel. The ones that I've found that can do that are way more expensive than are necessary for what I need. And so my plan is to just put some concrete down, get a good drivable area for a forklift that doesn't have to be all-terrain or use gravel. And that will save me quite a bit of money in the long term, both from a maintenance perspective on the machine, because I'm not a mechanic, I'm not mechanically inclined. And so fixing, like bobcats or larger tractors or things that, larger forklifts that can do the gravel road type situation, it's not a skill set I have. It's not something I want to pay for long term because it's not necessary. I can get a standard, pretty simple forklift as long as I have the paved area for it to drive on. All good. So I'll spend a little bit of money up front, but that concrete pad and the forklift are going to be cheaper than if I had to buy a gravel worthy or gravel capable machine that can lift, the 2,000-3,000 pounds regularly that I'm going to need to be lifting. But everything else, doors and flow, I talked about a little earlier, 100% agree. Eaves, make the eaves big enough to block out the summer sun, short enough to get winter sun, passive temp control. 100% agree, just depends on structural whatnot, and also what's possible from a cost perspective. So definitely something to take into account. Locate stairs next to the hole against the wall. This space opposite the door will become dead space. May as well put stairs there. Stairs up against the wall, flow, walk through the door, walk straight upstairs, second floor, etc. If I'm understanding correctly from the diagram that I had on the first video, my thought is wherever the garage door is at, you've got a man door on one side of it. Again, just depends on the layout. And then once you go through that door, it'll be open into whatever, wherever the garage door is opening into, right? And somewhere within there on one of the walls on the sides would probably be the best place to stick the stairs. Potentially in the middle. Honestly, it just really depends once we know the orientation of the building and where the doors are going to go. Then we'll be able to decide, where it makes sense to put the stairs. because from a stairs perspective, I want to make sure that I can put it somewhere that the forklift isn't going to be impeded, and so we can get things up on that second floor easier, not having to manually move them up and down on the stairs. But yes, good thoughts on doors, eaves, and stair location. I think that's everything. Anybody else who had comments on the previous video or sent me thoughts? I think I responded to those. If I haven't, please let me know. If there's anything in this one that you think would be good to add, please let me know. I mentioned my next steps early at the beginning of this, so I'm going to start doing those, and hopefully things move forward with the land purchase, and then we can really get into design and whatnot with some drawings, additional info as I research that Ento leader, and we go from there. So thanks for joining. See you soon.